Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I call it divine love. I mean, there's not, we use the term love here easily, and when people say, well, when NDEers come back and say it's all about love, love is all that matters, they think we mean like the human perception of love, like what can you do for me? How do you make me feel? It's all about me and egocentric, right?
Yep.
Where divine love is that whole connectedness of we are all one,
Mm.
and there's no fear, there is no hate, no envy. There is only like I want the best for you. Like I can't explain it, but there's a huge difference from the perception of those two things.
Okay. Hey there, beautiful souls. It's your girl, Allie, and we're back at it again for another episode of Living Life Consciously. We have a very special guest lined up for you today, and I'm stoked to get started. So without further ado, Justin, say hey.
Hey, Cosmic Thrill Seekers, I'm Justin, and this is Living Life Consciously, where we explore the extraordinary, ride the waves of inspiration, and embark on an adventure of limitless curiosity together.
And I'm your co-host, Leslie, also known as Light Being Love, an eternal spiritual being having a temporary human experience. I'm very happy to be here with this beautiful quantum being. How are you?
I am good, and I am so happy to be here with you and your community. Thank you for having me.
Yes.
We're very excited, and to introduce you to our audience, please meet Loreli Drache, also known as Rev Lori Ellis, a multifaceted spiritual practitioner with a unique journey marked by 4 or now 5 near-death experiences, starting at the age of 7. Beyond NDEs, Loreli has delved into various spiritual realms, encountering entities like ETs, Celestials, Faeries, Sasquatch, and orbs. Her diverse experience include Kundalini awakening, connection to Christ consciousness, after-death communication, and shared death encounters. As a spiritual minister, mystic, Reiki Master, quantum Shamanic Lotus Energy Healer, and more, Loreli's expertise extends to spiritual mentoring, NDE reintegration, psychic intuitive empath abilities, and mediumship. She is clair-abled, performing DNA, dragon, lotus, and light code activations, as well as soul braiding, retrieval, and attachment removal. Loreli's background includes a medical assistant diploma, and she has held various roles and certifications in the medical field. Beyond her spiritual practices, she is a published poet, writer, intuitive jewelry artist, and graphic designer. Passionate about guiding others on the mystic path, Loreli is the founder of Spirit Sight, a community fostering expanded consciousness. We love that around here.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit Sight hosts weekly healing circles, social gatherings, and sharing circles, along with a monthly event called Celebration of Consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
You can find insightful interviews and content on her YouTube channel called Spirit Insight with Loreli Drache. Explore the realms of collective consciousness and embark on a transformative journey with Loreli. All right, where would you like to begin?
Oh, goodness. Most of the time, like I said, I am called to speak on various things that I feel are important in the current situations.
Sure.
But a lot of people like to, at least hear through a little bit of my near-death experiences and what I took away from them. Yeah. So probably, I think the one that really hits people is my 7-year-old experience, because when you happen to be that young, you don't have as much form programming, right? Of
Right.
what religion or anything else. I did grow up in a Catholic household, German descent. And so, in fact, my grandfather wanted to be a priest. So this plays into this in one thing.
Okay.
So that particular day, I think my dad was working. He usually works 7 days a week at Chrysler. And so I was there with my mom and my aunt and uncle. They lived across the street, literally. We all had farms connecting. I lived on 191 acres. with ponds and things, and this plays into it also. What happened is my aunt and uncle came over, and my brothers were there. My oldest brother wanted to go fishing, and mom wanted me underfoot because she was cooking supper. So needless to say, he had to take me with him. And so we went down to our deepest pond. It was like, yeah, that's our third pond. We just called them by numbers.
Okay.
And this particular one had one side where they fished at and the other side where we swam at, excuse me. And so it had a big wooden pier that they built out of pallets and stuff. Well, I wanted to go there and over by the little frog pond that was next to it. So my brother and my uncle stopped at the first pond to check, because that's right where this fish spawn. So I went to the second. My aunt came with me because I was 7, right?
Right.
And so there was this embankment and then the pier. So I went out there. She wouldn't go near there, and she didn't know how to swim. Neither did I, but 7, you're brave, right?
Yep.
So I went to the end of the pier, and I was looking off to the right, and that's kind of where the sun's coming down, so it was glaring off the water. I started to get that, that lull feeling if you watch the water too long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I moved to the other side where the sun wasn't in my face. And as I'm doing that, my aunt's saying she wants to go check on my uncle. She kind of had like a separation anxiety, what I would call it, for my uncle. Like, she was never happy unless he was in her space. So she went to check, and she asked if I'd be okay. Me 7, okay. Oh yeah, sure.
Like, yeah,
you have to remember, because people always react to this, but we are a farm family. You get responsibility very young. So it's not like, and I wasn't the normal kid. My mom even said I had an old soul from day one, right?
Yeah.
Just wise beyond my years. So I got responsibility of that, and I'm like, yeah, I'm fine, So she went to go there. And this is the oddest part about this experience. I was standing there one moment, then the next moment, and this doesn't make sense either. I was feet first sinking in the water. Like, if you were to fall, wouldn't you fall head first?
Yeah.
So to this day is very weird, but the whole situation was kind of weird.
Okay.
And so I was slowly, when I came to, I was already underwater. Like, when I had conscious of this experience, I was underwater and bubbles were floating above my face. I'm like, oh my God, this is my air. I'm going to die. And the minute I said I was going to die, I was out of my body watching it sink. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then I became aware, like, oh, where am I? And then I was watching everything, and it was just like instant. Like, and it felt so natural. That's the weird thing as well. But the interesting part, that kind of validates everything is my brother was at the next pond. He heard me fall in. My aunt probably heard me fall in because she was screaming for them. I could see all this happening, but I instantly could connect with each of their consciousness. So I heard my brother thinking, could he swim there faster or run to get to me? And I remember sitting there laughing. Like, I found great joy in it, because I was like, you can't do either of those. I mean, I was literally laughing, right?
Okay.
And I still do every time I say it. 'Cause I'm like, what were you thinking? And, of course, my aunt and uncle was all this guilt, like, oh my God, we were supposed to watch it. They're going to blame us, all these things. So I heard all of that, and I was just like, oh, okay. It's like I was checking on everybody. So then I got farther up, which is weird. Like, I was way in the clouds, and then I could see for miles. And so I checked in with my mom, and she was cooking dinner and wondering when we would get home, and if we caught anything, like what we did.
Mhm.
And I think she was cooking chili. Anyway, so this whole thing with that I checked that she was okay. Then instantly I was gone. I was in this space that felt like rolling clouds.
Mm.
And there was this big archway off to the left. I would have to check left. Right. It's off to the left. And there was the brightest light I have ever seen. I always compare it to it like a zillion LEDs, but so bright you thought you can look at it. But I'm like, wait, I can look at this. What is this? And it was in this archway. And I was looking up at it. I felt like a tiny little ant, looking at a giant. And so, and there was just this overwhelming, I'm sure you heard this 1,000 times, a sense of love, bliss, joy, all of that. But it felt like a parental love, times 10,000. Like, you couldn't imagine it on earth. The closest thing is a mother's love for her child. That's the closest thing I could say.
Okay.
And
That unconditional love.
yes, yeah, I call it divine love. I mean, there's not, we use the term love here easily, and when people say, well, when NDEers come back and say it's all about love is all that matters, they think we mean the human perception of love. Like, what can you do for me? How do you make me feel? It's all about me and egocentric, right?
Yeah.
Where divine love is that whole connectedness of we are all one,
Hmm.
and there's no fear, there is no hate, no envy. There is only like I want the best for you. You know, like I can't explain it, but there's a huge difference from the perception of those two things.
Okay.
And so I was just, and if you can imagine being bathed in that, and
From
then
the
being told you,
inside, right? Like,
yes, and then being told you have to go back.
Oh no. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm, this is the part I remember the most, and I could tell there was kind of like a guide with me, and I was answering. This being came through this light. I could barely make it out, but there was a shape, right? And I am sitting there, and there's this like telepathic type conversation going on about like why I have to go back, and I know I was shown things, but not allowed to remember, right? And I kept going like, "You're not making me go back to that. There's no way, no way." All the arguing. I was very petulant. And I was as a child anyway. I was very stubborn. So it felt like eons that this argument was going on. Like I was there forever. I can't even explain it. But there all of a sudden there was this huge booming male voice. You have more to do. You must go back. It was very authoritative. And I'm like,
you're like, oh, but I don't want
yeah.
to.
Well, and I'm still obstinate. This is what I don't understand how. But I was like, you can't make, like you can make me go back there, but you can't make me get in that body, for real. And so next thing, once he said that, I was down next to my body. They had just like laid it. They brought it up the embankment and laid it on its side. There was no water in my lungs that I recall. I don't recall any like physical trauma from it. Other than I didn't really talk. I don't think I talked till the next day, and that's when, like I said to my brother, like, why were you thinking that? And his jaw he turned white. He's like, and my mother knew something had happened, and I even said, like I died, like I knew I had died in this weird way, and because I knew all these things and what they were all doing, of course they knew that. And my family had had many spiritual experiences, and my mother didn't tell me later, that my dad had similar abilities, and that he spoke to spirits and could see spirits. I wasn't
Oh.
like till I was like 12, and he'd say, "Oh, do you see them? Can you describe them?" There's one, and we would do that. But he still didn't want people to know. Just and during that time period, because I know I think your audience is always interested in this stuff. I had within a year or two of that, I had this like contact, you might call it.
Of what nature?
Mhm.
Of what nature?
Well, I'm still not 100% sure. Some people call it with the galactics. I'm not sure. And I'm not sure if I was out of body during this experience or if I was truly wandering my yard. Okay. Because after that, I did have experiences where they found me doing things or other things after this. So, but I remember being in my white nightgown, wandering our property with this being. And this being was telling me all the reasons I was here. Of course, not allowed to remember that either. I just have a knowing of some of it, and we're having these conversations. And the only thing I remember, which is kind of funny because you have to remember I grew up in the 80s, they're like, your parents are aliens. So right away, when I, regain that memory, I'm thinking, oh my God, my parents are aliens. They were body snatched. Because that's back when all that was going on,
Yeah.
and the movie Body Snatchers. Right.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Yeah, my
Yes,
parents talked about
yes.
that movie too.
So I'm freaking out, going, "Oh my God, are they really aliens? I know this really happened. What am I supposed to do? No wonder I don't fit in with my family. I'm thinking they're the alien. Wrong." But in a Beyond Quantum Hypnosis session about that, my higher self said that when I asked who that being was, I said Father, and they're like, "Who's Father? What Father?" And I said, "The All Father, the Father of all that is."
Oh.
Okay.
Make it however you want, but that's who I claimed this experience was with. But during my childhood, I had various galactic experiences where I like remember seeing like burnt circles of crop circle where like looked like one had landed.
Really?
Yeah, and there was a lot of activity on our property prior to me being born and after with Sasquatch. I don't call him Bigfoot because that's disrespectful. I'm sorry, but
Okay.
Oh,
with
okay.
Sasquatch. But one of my experiences well, I think it was right prior to when I was born. They were seeing these giant orbs that had this sound coming from them. And later, when what the things I learned about Sasquatch, a lot of what we blame on spirits and
Mhm.
UFO type phenomenon is actually Sasquatch or interdimensional beings.
Oh.
And I always even say, from my own experiences, we're ghosting our own timeline. I can't even count how many times anymore that they have shown me, or I have awareness of messing with my own timeline. So,
Really? Okay.
yes. And so, yeah, because one of the things they gave me, my sisters, they thought we had ghosts before I was born, and we did have some spirit activity, mind you, but this they thought that this being had made like their doll clothes, like Barbie doll clothes, into like a heart and stuff like that. But spirit showed me during one of my experiences, because I wasn't able to grow up with my sisters because they're 10 and 12 years older,
Mm.
that I came to play with them prior to being born. I don't know.
Oh, so maybe you were one of those orbs. Is that what the gist of that was?
No, I don't know about that, about the orbs. That's
Oh,
an interesting connection. No, but I figure out that is how, when Sasquatch is moving through dimensionally, they use orbs. They appear as big orbs.
Okay.
okay.
The other thing I learned that we experienced is, and that I saw was, and if you've done any research on Sasquatch, was that my brothers were trappers. I mean, we were a farm family, right? Something came through and literally cracked the trees like way high, like cracked them all, and facing towards the road. This is a Sasquatch thing. Like I said, it freaked my brothers out because they're like, "That's no bear. No bear is that tall." All these things, and it happened around every trap that they had laid. And I saw with my own eyes because my brothers made me and my mom get hop in the truck and go check the property,
Hmm.
and they were really freaked out. Another thing, later on,
Okay.
I had an experience with my dad, because my dad worked second shift at Chrysler, so he didn't get home till about 10:30. There was a lot more of that activity of them in the evening, and one instance I remember was this pounding. This pounding. He had one where there was pounding on the porch, but this one was by the driveway. They were pounding on the side of the house, and I remember hiding. He's like, "Just be quiet. They'll move on, right?" And I didn't quite believe my dad. I've always been a skeptic for that. I've had all these things happen.
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, whatever. But the next day he took me out, we went out, and we had like clay type and stone driveway because it was a quarter of a mile long, it's a farm driveway. So there was these giant big footprints. And there was
Wow.
two, because one was smaller and they're wider. At least in my experience, they look wider than a human footprint. So it's not like, even if
Okay.
you stepped in it and expanded it in the clay of your own foot, it wouldn't quite look the same.
Yeah.
So
Gotcha.
there was what must have been two, which is exactly what we heard, pounding, that went on. But during a recent experience, and I'm still trying to process this. When I was at the IANS conference in Washington D.C., I spoke there this year. I met someone who runs a mystic school and all these things, and I was saying something. She's like, "Well, of course you are," because I keep being told like I'm a Sasquatch hybrid, because in my Beyond Quantum Hypnosis, I said I've been Sasquatch many lifetimes. And
Okay.
Oh.
that's where my portal and my vortex ability and the ability to use those, as well as my dragon stuff. They have
That
their own
makes sense.
complex. Yes, along with
Okay.
the dragons have their own complex portal system, that they don't always give access to everyone. I've also learned, but so through all of those experiences, just kind of, how everything kind of stacks up spiritually. They
Hmm.
don't give you more than you can handle.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
through all of that, I've just come to accept it and not often claim it. But for your community, I figured they might understand that a little bit. Um, so, and I did have one other galactic thing during that time. I must have been like 10 or 12. That just seems to be when it was very active, which is late 70s, early 80s. And I had it validated by a police officer friend of ours. A giant football sized craft uh, appeared, but it appeared like, it almost like the sky opened up. It's like there
Football
was an
field,
alternate reality behind it.
like a football field size.
Yeah, this ship was. And there was this
Mhm.
huge like slit in the sky that it came through. It's like literally somebody tearing the sky away like it's just a
I
picture.
was just
Wow.
thinking of
Yeah.
that film, A Tear in the Sky by Caroline
Oh, is it?
Corey. I was just
I
thinking
haven't
that.
seen that. Really?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it came out and there was all these like light pink. I think there were, I've had more and more remembrance of it. Like these I don't get into it sometimes because there's never enough time to explain everything you see. But there was these circular like crafts, almost like flying saucer, but they look more light based,
Okay.
around this big ship. But then, and these didn't exist at that time, but this is exactly what they look like. Those newer, I mean, when did they say they came out? 2000 or something. The stealth fighters, those black ones with the wings and the low hood. You know what I'm talking about, the military
Okay.
stuff. It was those firing at this craft.
Really?
I don't know if that was like a reality tear, a dimensional thing. I don't understand that whole thing. I just remember them shooting at it and one of them going down. But the thing I remember most, and it wasn't the galactics I was worried about. I said, are they going to erase our memories again or just kill us this time? I remember saying that to my mother. So, given all the activity around there and even all the neighbors saw it, none of them talk about it, of course, because nobody wants to be the crazy person, right? We'd only talk amongst ourselves.
Sure.
So a lot of that was going down. But the thing that is interesting about this is right around that same time, like I said, my friend who is the town police officer for the township was called for literally a UFO sighting. It was over the quarry about a mile from our property. He said when him and his partner got there, it was there. They could see it. But then it cloaked almost like what you would call Wonder Woman's jet. Like he could still see it. It was shimmery, but it cloaked.
Wow.
And they were so freaked out.
Kind of like Predator in that movie Alien and Predator when it goes into that clear mode, but
Yeah.
like if it
Oh,
moves, you could see the distortion through it, but it's
Yes.
like clear.
He said you could see the distortion, exactly.
Oh.
And what is that one guy that just did that mirroring of a skyscraper where it mirrors everything outside of it? You know how they're doing that new technology where it mirrors everything outside of it, so it literally makes it invisible.
Okay.
We got that tech already. But anyway, so it did that, and of course they freaked out, and they're like, "You see that? That's a," and of course they didn't report it because they didn't want to lose their jobs. But he wanted to validate it to me, like, you're not crazy because I've seen it.
Right.
One of those kind of things. So I grew up with all that. So that gives you a little bit of background. But it was interesting because I think it was my mid 30s, I was at a powwow. Didn't really honestly have no reason to be there as far as like, I'm not indigenous, but I'm very connected to that energy and spirituality of them. And we happen to be selling, our jewelry and things. We got accepted. I don't even, it's one of these weird things. Like I was looking at all the other vendors. I'm like, I don't fit here, but we were talking and this very old elder came up to us. Some people say, and I say it wrong all the time. It's like but maybe he was a Hayote. I can't even say it. Empath, their medicine man, but the kind of like the trickster type and speaking riddles type of thing. Because he came up to me out of nowhere, asked me to hold these 5 stones. They were black stones, but I don't think they were Apache tears, but they were rounded. And he had me hold them. He had actually my husband, I think, hold them first. And then he said something to him. He's like, and then he asked me and he had me hold them. And then he gave us all this weird stuff. Like I, to this day, cannot remember exactly what he spoke because I couldn't even follow it. It's almost like speaking to your soul rather than you, if that's the best way to put it. So, and then, he kind of walked around our tent and started to walk away. And right as he's coming to the front of it, he starts talking about this property. This is when I'm not really aware, right? And he starts talking about this property and he's describing it and where it's at. I said, oh my God, that's where I grew up. He's like, well, because he was telling how his people knew that there was a giant paranormal vortex on this property and it used to be their land. So it explains a lot of my experiences with interdimensional beings, right?
Okay.
And I'm like, I'm like, that's where I grew up. And he's like, He just gave me this weird side wink and
like
just
he
kept
knew
walking.
already. He knew already.
He did, but I'm clueless, right? And then literally, we tried to find him. He just disappeared. We could not find him anywhere. Nobody knew. We kept asking. It's one of those really weird spiritual encounters.
Yeah.
Like, set you in the path, my son.
I was wondering earlier when you were mentioning all of this activity that you had growing up, if the activity was attached or, like because of the property that you were living on, or if it was because of you and your genetics and your hybrid nature and all that, or maybe it's just like a combination of both. I don't know.
Yeah, well, because you're also a portal yourself and your energy centers are portals. Plus all of, like I said, that they said there's a vortex there. And I'm pretty much like a water being. Water is my superpower, I guess you could say. So living with all of that underground springs like that. So I think there was a combination that property felt very powerful. People had a lot of experiences there.
Okay.
And some people refused to ever come back there. And there was other ones is like, can I come over?
This
Like
is
people,
like giving
walked in
Skinwalker
and-
Ranch vibes. This is
Yeah,
like
to be
really
honest,
reminding
yeah.
me of that.
And so the interesting thing, I haven't delved too much into the NDE stuff, but the interesting about that too is my mother had a deathbed vision about the property I was supposed to live on. And it kind of looked like the old property I lived on previously until I moved here. And it's almost a replica, but different and opposite. So it totally aligns with where she saw I was supposed to be when the world changes a little bit, let's just say. And I've gotten validation with that for various things. And this is also there's a like almost an acre or so private lake behind me. So I needed to get back to water. I knew
Mhm.
that.
Okay.
And with Missouri, and I knew nobody here. I just kept saying for like 5 or 6 years, I have to get to Missouri. People are like, why? I'm like, I don't know. But it has a lot of quartz and other mineral huge veins under a lot of the state. So I had an understanding that between, the indigenous connection to this land and the water and everything else that like I was supposed to be here. And so the last 5 years since I've been here has been a huge, huge spiritual expansion for me and my whole family. And that's a strange thing too. People always ask me about because my family are all experiencers too. I mean, what are the odds of that you have five
Right,
people?
right.
Right.
And so, and my daughter often gets messages, or the other half. She says, "Stop asking the universe because if I don't experience it and they can't contact me, they can do it to her." Yeah, she's like, "Mom, stop asking."
Mm.
Because they always want to give me validation for what I ask, and that's how a lot of these experiences, unfortunately, happen. But I don't know what else you. I mean, there's so much I could talk about.
So during those
I'll go off on.
experiences, have you ever had a sense or a feeling of like everything just stops and everything gets quiet and still?
During these experiences, let me think. Yeah, my 2019 experience with Christ consciousness, I call it, was kind of
Okay.
like that. I started getting like these messages from Yeshua, and he said, "Don't call me Jesus." So that's why another one of those things.
Okay.
And he told me, that kind of stuff that I'm sure some have heard. That he is equal to us. I'm his brother. I'm his sister. We're his brothers and sisters. What he could do, we can do. All of those type of things, and that he
Mhm.
didn't want to be worshipped, and some other things. So that was going on, and on a particular day, I just felt out of sorts, and I didn't know why because I wasn't really into grounding or any of that at that time. And I'm like, I gotta go outside. I just gotta connect. I said I need to ground to my husband. And as soon as I got outside, it's kind of like your physical being shut down, and there's just this movie playing out of your third eye, right?
Okay.
So I was being shown. I call it the Lucy moment. If you've ever seen that movie, because that
Love
movie
that
I have
movie.
seen.
Yeah.
Right, it was literally one of those Lucy moments. In fact, I told him to stop, or I would literally cease to exist.
Hmm.
Oh wow.
At least that's how I felt, because it was this huge downpour of how Earth was a thought form and came into creation, and how that all works, and the manifestation of how we created chaos and in this duality and everything else. And so I saw Earth like from the time it was like this magma ball and just kind of built from there.
Oh wow.
During the visual of this, um, the rest was more like feelings and knowings and sayings. And I just remember I was completely ugly crying, like because I felt the weight of it all. Like,
Mhm.
okay, so if you are connected with collective consciousness, you have the weight of every choice they made that was not a loving choice. Okay.
Okay.
So when I say me, I believe I'm speaking as the oneness of all, right?
Okay.
At least that's how I'm understanding it. So I felt the whole weight of that and all the choices and the different things that we had done to change this beautiful paradise, and fell from that frequency and all that, however ever you can make it biblical or not. But that's just my understanding of it. Like paradise has always been here. We no longer perceive it or resonate on that timeline or whatever term or
Mhm.
Okay.
um
Resonate
anyway
with
you
that
want to give that,
frequency.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm in the process of doing all this ugly crying, and then I walked to the end of our driveway, and there's these 3 huge trees. This is when I really one of my other tree experiences, and I call them the sentinels. It's kind of like they were guiding me and showing me everything as well. And I just felt like this oneness with all of the nature, and like I was just apologizing, ugly crying, and saying, I know I came here to fix it. I'll fix it. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, it was very profound. I do the other part of that experience that was really interesting is then I walked back up towards the house once it was like calming, but then this whole thing came through me. It sounded very indigenous, like the Sami, because I do have some Norse heritage.
Okay.
But it also was a combination of more like light language. I started singing, and I had never done this before. I've done it a lot since, but this huge thing for like 20 minutes, I swear it felt like forever. But my only understanding as a conscious being, like my human consciousness, was just that like it was a protective and a healing, like for everything in my land and to protect my property. And I remember, I think that's when I came in from that experience. My daughter, like I told you, my oldest daughter, is very intuitive and has her own experience. She was like, "You're not my mom." I said, "What?" So your energy is different. You're not the same as when you went outside. So that
Oh,
was a huge
wow. Was
validation
that
to
profound,
me.
huh?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And it just increased from there. It was one experience after another of connected consciousness. And so often I'm in what I call the 360 view. Like, what do they call it? The creator, the observer, and the experiencer.
All in
Or
one.
some people use, yeah. So so I was often in the observer view. And I only could like pick and choose when I truly wanted to experience something. I was very detached. That was the thing I was going to say about my 7-year-old experience. Like for a year, I didn't feel like I was embodied. Like I kept telling you, I did not want to go in. I felt like I was like outside my body, but with my body. I just refused at that time. And this is where I think it's important with NDEs as well, because I feel like they're an individual experience. And if you talk to me then, or people like back then wanted me to write a book and all this other stuff, but my perception would have been so limited,
Mm.
because some people have an NDE and kind of stop at that experience, or that it's as far as they integrate it. And so as it went on between my other experiences, I understood why I was here, all these other things. So by my fourth experience, I was like, my third one I chose to come back for my daughter, but by the fourth one, I'm like, I did too much work and too many lifetimes for this experience to miss what's coming. You get me back in there, where before I was dragging my feet. So I think, some people are like, I got sent back. I didn't want to be back. I understand it all now. Where if I would have wrote it then, like they made me, and and because there's a lot of belief systems about traps and different things of talk about all of that, where they feel like they were tricked into coming back or different things. And
Yeah.
I understand that. I validate. That's another thing I learned in my experiences is the sovereignty of creation. Everybody creates their own truth in my eyes anyway. That's how they showed it to me. Like we're all experiencing and creating our own timelines with this energetic agreement to share certain things. So like for you, it's a blue shoe. For me, it's a red, but we're experiencing the same backdrop. Because one of the experience I had with spirit, they were showing me as like, those old color form things. I think they were big in the 80s or 90s. The color forms, where they were like these little sticky things, almost like the window clings. And they would have a whole backdrop of like, this is the house and this is your neighborhood. And you could stick on it whatever you wanted and create kind of like that.
Okay,
we all have the same earth backdrop, so to speak. What we do with it is totally up to us and our perceptions, right?
Gotcha.
Sure.
That was kind of my understanding of that. And so it's interesting as you integrate how your perception changes,
Right.
and what you see as suffering versus opportunity. I got my clairs really, really opened up. I had them, like I had prophetic dreams after my first near-death experience. I could tell when souls were leaving or preparing to come into a body, like if, somebody was pregnant and stuff.
Oh wow.
The scary part about that is as a child, the faces looked like they were melting. They looked like if they were about to leave.
Oof.
They look like wax dummies, and I asked not to see that anymore. For obvious
That
reasons.
would probably scare me just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
And and that's the interesting thing too. As a child, you think and there was nobody to talk to. That's before, I think IANs might have been around, but it's not like I had access to it.
Right.
To understand it, so it's like, did I cause that? Or
I
I
see.
tell people things and they wouldn't listen and they die or something would happen to them. That kind of responsibility as a young child. Some people try to romanticize NDEs. It's not all that romantic.
Okay.
Or saying, I wish I had one, so I had all this understanding. I'm like, you can get there. My whole point about bringing up these perceptions that different people get from people talking about this is that responsibility that I don't want to misperceive these experiences, and number two, one of my things that I am a proponent of is you don't have to die to learn to live. Okay, all of these things
I
are
like that.
available to
Yeah.
you now.
Nice.
Yeah, that's actually the writing that went viral that started getting me interviewed was titled that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So, there's just principles and ways of looking at experiences that change your perception, and those are
Sure.
available to everyone.
What's your
Sure.
opinion of the term ontological shock? Where do you think that fits into all this?
I'm not familiar with that term, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
What is it?
Ontological shock is basically where, like you're raised to have a certain way of thinking or, a certain understanding of how the reality around you operates. And then you learn something new and it takes everything that you thought you knew and it crumbles it down. And then you got to like rebuild it back up from the pieces. And it's obviously not the same as before because you have all this new knowledge and new understanding. So people coin that term ontological shock. And it's just basically saying like, you have to unlearn everything you thought you knew and relearn everything. And yeah.
Well, thank you for that one. I'll know what it is. I mean, I've heard it all described, but I've never
Okay.
knew it had a term yet.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right. And, honestly, I think that's been the most challenging part of being an experiencer. When people start coming to these meetings that I facilitate or with these other nonprofits that I am involved in, we see people start to expand and have their own experiences, not necessarily NDEs, but I mean these huge awakening things.
Yes.
From being exposed to A, expanding their mind, and B, being exposed to those higher frequencies on a regular basis. In fact, that's literally why they had me create the Celebration of Consciousness event that I did. But from my understanding, and that's where that responsibility comes in discernment, because dumping it on anyone that isn't ready for that, is a lot. Some people
Yeah.
can go through a really bad dark night of the soul, have a spiritual emergency, become suicidal. I mean, there's a lot of things to it, so I always say I let people find me. The seekers will find you, or spirit guides them to me. So I don't randomly just say to people, hey, did you know?
Okay.
Right. Because maybe they're not ready
Right.
to hear it. Go ahead.
Okay. Suppose you know somebody that is going through that very scenario, what would be one of the best things that we could do for that person?
Like
as far as like
in
sending them
support?
in support,
Yeah.
like sending them energy, sending them healing love,
Mm, um,
would it be a form of
honestly,
Reiki?
yes. I mean, any of that can help to like balance, any of those energetic things going on within their own expansion, and that's why I think NDE and, these spiritual experiences, to integrate them is so important, because
Right.
even having that knowledge and even I find that people, it resonates with their soul, and that's actually what fractures them, because they know on some core level that there's truth to it, but
Yeah.
they don't
Yes.
want to believe or validate it. And it creates this whole conflict between their soul spark and their human consciousness. Because the body, from my medical intuitive work and different things that have happened to me, the body has its own consciousness, and the spirit has its own consciousness. And often we don't validate the body's consciousness. So for some
Okay.
of these people, not only are they having this fracture of their spirit's trying to go this way, and their body is much more aligned, to the 3D, the earthly experience, and they don't know how to mesh the two. I mean, often, like when I say if somebody's having a spiritual emergency, obviously, psychiatric care can help, but shamanic. I often say check with both before you make any decisions, right?
Okay.
Just because I because there is a definitive of telling the difference which they're having, if they're having a psychotic break or if they're having a spiritual emergency. And there's a lot of specialists now in those fields, so
Do
it's
you
very
mind if we delve into that, just because that is
okay.
very
Synchronistic
synchronistically
to
relevant to something that we're dealing with
right.
right now? Not personally, but someone we know is going through that exact situation. And we just want
Mhm.
to know like what we can do to help from our end.
Mhm. And mostly it's just honestly from my experience is to be supportive, answer what questions you can. If they
Yeah.
have questions or things that they're not sure about, to guide them to the proper resources. Because sometimes people have these questions and they're
Yeah.
getting a zillion different answers from different people because they go to the people they trust first, and they might not always know everything, right?
Yeah.
So the more they get confused information, I feel that's more detrimental to them, because
Right.
then it's like, am I crazy? These people sound crazy. What is this? I remember like a few newcomers who like they're they started to see orbs or angels or different things, and
Mm-hmm.
one of them was a professional in healthcare, and and different backgrounds that are totally scientific, and they couldn't make it right with their own mind. They still thought my experience was crazy, but they couldn't explain theirs either, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And since then they're slowly expanding, because it's, like, if this is happening to me, you start to get to the realization, if this is happening to other people
Yep.
and so many other people, there must be something to it, right? That's
Yeah.
that's why Spirit told me, like, I was a hermit on the hill, and granted, I can talk a mean spell, right? But I honestly am very introverted. I always say I'm the most introverted extrovert you'll ever meet, however you say that. Um, but literally, I was nudged. The 2019 experience was about talking and bringing this knowledge, right? Um, and so I didn't do it. So then I had in 2021 my fourth death experience, and they're like, at your level of light, you have to watch, your words. You have to be mindful of what you do and create, um, because when you're at that high frequency, this is why Earth protects you. When you're at that high frequency, things manifest like this, even the
Mm.
simplest things.
Oh wow.
I've freaked people out about that, right?
Yeah.
And I could give you so many experiences, but I'm just saying. So Earth has this density to protect us as creator beings.
Okay.
Because think about everything. If everything you think or say or will into existence, even in your uncontrolled emotional state, because emotions create. That was another thing, a part of that hypnosis that came through. Um, and so think about when you're most mad, or things you're directing at people. You're still pumping that energy. You're literally cursing them if you're yelling at them. And their body hears that. So I'm very mindful of all of those things. So that was part of that experience. But just think about if all that manifested right away. Like if you're so angry, they're like, I wish I never met you. Or, I wish you just, these terrible things we say when we don't balance our emotional state and our triggers,
Mm-hmm.
all that would manifest instantly.
Mm.
In fact, people get so afraid that they reincarnate right away, because in the voided creation, everything's going on at once. Every thought can be instantly created. Can you imagine what chaos that would look like if you didn't know what you were experiencing?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, anyway, back to all of that. So, for me, it's important to send them to the right resources. That's why I'm really thankful for the organizations I'm involved with, because they do all that research, and they gather all of these things, just like, famous researcher PMH Atwater, like she researches and collects all these things so you can see what these other experiences are, and there's quite a few spiritual organizations that have a lot of materials. At least then they can see a whole background. But for me, some of that is or does, need professionals, whether they be energetic healers, shamans, or spiritual counselors. There are those. There's even spiritual psychologists, but sometimes people need those. But as somebody who's trying to support them, I think that's the best way. I don't mean
Thank
to
you
like
for that.
inundate them. You're welcome.
Yeah.
I don't mean to inundate them with a bunch of resources, because that can be very, which we call they can also be traumatic. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Very.
need these. I need somebody to listen to me.
Right.
Sometimes they just want an empathic listener. Like, this is what I'm going through, and this doesn't match my life. How do I make it match my life? Near death experiencers, that is the hardest part. They come back completely different people, usually if they've had this deep experience. It depends. Everybody's that is individual. I mean, I think the divorce rate is like 85%.
Yeah, it is.
Because
Wow.
you're no longer
because they're no longer the same
partner.
person.
No, I mean, like, my husband wants his wife back, trust me. No, sometimes, but yes. Because I was this little, until I had this experience, and it wasn't even NDE, you
I
know,
think we can all relate to that at this point, right?
right? And, you know, I was little Midwest Susie homemaker. You know what I mean? I was a medical assistant. You know, I just lived that very 3D storyline.
Yeah.
And then I started seeing grids and all of these things, and they did not align with that. And it was interesting because, you know, through different use of chemicals, my husband very much experimented in his 20s. Like, he had all these phenomenal experiences, but of course, he's very scientific and was raised very religious. So they were just dismissed as drug induced things until I started having them, and I've never done anything because
Okay.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
so you know, then you know, but he still didn't want to validate it. I mean, there's some other experiences I've had that he's experienced with me, and he's like, you know, and people get in such fear and they limit their experiences.
You know,
I think
our bodies are very capable of producing, you know, its own chemicals, right? And sometimes some of those experiences, you don't have to use some substance, you know. You can have whatever experience you want, and you can make it, you know, your body makes everything,
right.
you know.
And yeah, I know, because like you know, there was always that argument of, is NDE, you know, the release of, is it ketamine? What is that?
DMT.
Oh,
DMT.
yeah,
Yeah, dimethyltryptamine.
yeah, when they crossed over, and that's where stories like mine, where I experienced my whole family and things that couldn't be validated, are, you know, speak to that. No, consciousness exists outside the body. I often leave my body. I know lots of people that leave their body.
Sure.
Your body can do all sorts of things manually without your spirit consciousness having to be there. Okay.
Exactly.
And that's just my experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of has to do with, you know, also, you know, how you can astral project, or you can, what do they call it? All of a sudden I'm blanking out on that.
Remote view.
By location, you know, all of those things.
Reverend
all
Bill
of those
talked
things.
about biolocation.
Yeah, Reverend Bill did too. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, where you can be in two places. And sometimes, like, I've had people see more of an apparition of me, not a full apparition, but, you know, those type of things. We're only as locked into this 3D reality, in my experiences, as we choose to be, in that believe we are. In my experiences, like, we're very limitless beings.